Hello, everybody. We see the numbers, all of you moving into the Zoom here. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrea Beaumont. I am with Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Sciences, and I am here as part of the NAAHP Postbac Committee. So we're going to do a couple of introductions and then get started. I will be your moderator today. So if there are questions that you have about postbacs overall, please feel comfortable putting them in the chat. I will do my best to answer questions as I can in the chat, but also directing some of those questions to our two main presenters. So I'm going to hand it over to them to please introduce themselves and get underway.
All right, thanks, Andrea. Hi, folks. My name is Bob Rarig. I'm the Postbac Director at Temple University CST Postbac Program. I'm also co-chair of the NAP Postbac Committee. I'll be presenting the back half of this presentation before we do Q&A, and I will pass things over to Susan, who will get the presentation started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Loren Smith. I'm a pre-med, pre-PA advisor and faculty at Northwestern Health Sciences University in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And Bob and I co-chair the NAP Postbac Committee. So today we're going to talk about what are postbacs and are they the right thing for you? So first off, NAP, some of you may know what that is. NAP stands for the National Association of Advisors for Health Professionals. So these would be advisors at your undergrad institution or advisors at postbac programs who help guide students in that process of applying to a professional program in the health professions. So this committee serves to be a intellectual home and sounding board for postbac programs as this area of education has really grown. So we want to talk to you about how these programs, what the differences of them are, and how they might fit your educational plan. So what is a postbac program? So by definition, it's a program that you could participate in and enroll in after you've received your undergraduate degree. So you've completed your four-year bachelor degree, and then you maybe have decided on a professional program in the health professions and are looking to make yourself a competitive candidate. You're looking at these types of programs. So first and foremost, you do need to have that undergraduate degree, that four-year bachelor's degree. Programs might include the academic courses that you need to be a competitive candidate for these different programs. So whether that's strict required prerequisites or recommended prerequisites, whether that's for the professional program or for standardized tests such as the MCAT or the DAT. They may also include clinical experiences that might be shadowing or other opportunities for even paid work in clinical settings, research experiences. So they may have programs themselves that have ongoing research programs, or in addition, they may have linkages or connections to different research programs that are local to that particular school. And in many cases, they offer mentoring, test prep for those standardized entrance exams, application support, letters of recommendation or evaluation writing, and then mock interviews. So they may offer any or all of those. So how do you find a postbac program? So there are a couple of places that you can look for postbac programs. So AAMC, and obviously you're familiar with that because you're at this talk today. AAMC has a database. And so if you see over here where my mouse is, this is what their database looks like. They do have a glossary of terms so that you understand what you're looking at and how how those terms are used and how the program is using it. It is searchable in terms of a handful of parameters. Also, the Association for Osteopathic Schools also has a program listing, but these are ones that are connected to osteopathic programs only. So that's a subset of the programs. There is a CAS that many postbac programs use, but not all. And that's administered by Liaison, which administers the CAS for DO schools, vet schools, dental schools, PA, so a wide variety of different graduate programs. They also have a post-bac CAS. And so for the programs that participate in that particular CAS, you can look at those programs in the post-bac CAS and you can make an account there. It doesn't cost you anything. And then you can compare those programs. Again, that's a real subset of programs because it's only the schools that are participating in the post-bac CAS. And then certainly word of mouth, recommendations from alum, from your advisor. And I certainly hope you're working with your advisor at your institution. All of those are good resources. I'll put a plug in for NAP and Andrea in the chat, if you could put NAP's website in, that would be great. That will give you contact information and background information about us and also about the NAP Postbac Committee. But there's also a section there about find an advisor if you don't have one. So that's a really good resource for you. And there's a glossary of terms about postbacs and some other really useful information. So I would strongly recommend that. So one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at these different programs is this is a really diverse landscape. You have programs that are academic record enhancers. So in many cases, they're offering the prereq courses, those undergraduate courses. Maybe you've already taken them, but you're taking them again to improve your grades, so improve your GPA. Keeping in mind that grades never actually get replaced or go away, but you're showing a trend. You might be a career changer. There are programs that are specifically designed for people who've never taken these courses before. There may be ones that combine both of those. So you can do a career changer or you can be an academic record enhancer. You have some that are really targeted to students who are underrepresented in medicine or dentistry. So that is a particular target range for them. You have, as I said, programs that offer undergraduate courses. So that would mean that their numbers were 400 or 4,000 or less. So these would go into your undergraduate GPA. And then you have programs that are graduate courses. So they're above a 4,000 or a 400 level course. You have programs that are called DIY, which means you design your own program in terms of the courses that you need based upon what you've done in the past. Some of these programs offer different credentials. In some cases, it's a certificate. In some cases, you do get a degree, a master's degree. In some cases, it's credit only. One isn't inherently better than another, although they do have implications in terms of cost and in terms of eligibility for federal loans. I think that it's really important when you look at these programs, I think two things. Remember that these programs know that they're there to help someone make a transition into professional programs. So they're not looking for a perfect student, right? But they are looking for people who are driven, who are motivated, who are evidence-based, who are coachable and resilient. And I think it's really important to realize that each student is individual in terms of their experiences and their needs, and then, of course, their goals. So you really need, as a student, to look at these programs and say, what is it I need? What serves my needs? You might have a good friend who's also applying, let's say, to dental school, and you're applying to dental school, but you took different classes in college, you've had different experiences. Maybe each of you need very different postbacs. So while I think there are useful forums and guides on the internet, keep in mind that the writer of any of those answers is basing on their particular experiences. So it's always really important to think about what is it I need. And I always say to students, be really honest in that about what you need, not aspirational, right? Say, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do I need to get to the next step? And that's very likely different than the next person to you. So keep that in mind. So when we look at programs, one way we could divide them is if they're lockstep, cohort-based synchronous. So as an example, maybe it starts right after Labor Day in September and it goes for 10 months and then it finishes. You all start together in September, you're a cohort, you take the same set of classes, you all work together through this process. That is a model that you'll see a lot of. It works really well for particular students with particular needs. There's also programs that are more unstructured. Now that I don't necessarily mean, it's a random set of classes, but in other words, what you're doing for your schedule is individualized. Maybe you need to take, physics and biochemistry, but you don't need additional classes, as an example. So in those unstructured programs, it isn't cohort-based. You aren't all taking the same class at the exact same time, although there would be other students in your classes. And your academic schedule and the length of time you were there would be based upon your previous academic record. So you might be at that program for 3 or 4 terms and someone else might be there 5 terms, as an example, right? Both of these types of programs have real values and they fit students' needs, but those are different student needs. So again, really take the time when you're thinking about these programs and talking with advisors. So like for instance, tomorrow you can meet with advisors from different programs. Talk to them about what you need. I think that a great thing about postbac advisors is they're very open to talking about postbacs and being honest and saying, hey, our program isn't a really good fit for you for these reasons, but why don't you look at these types of other programs, right? So they don't want to sell you something that's not a good fit for you. So I'd really encourage you tomorrow to go to the postbac fair, talk to a variety of different programs. Maybe make an effort to really talk to some that are cohort based and some that are more individualized to get a sense of what really fits your particular needs, right? And again, being honest about those. So some things to consider as you look at these different programs. How long does it take to complete? Again, is there flexibility in that? How many credits maximally can be awarded? Is there a minimum number that I have to take to be considered part of the program? Can I work while I'm in the program? Is it a full-time class schedule or could I do it part-time? What is the class size? These are the people you're going to be going through this process with. So what's that size? What's that community around that? How are the courses delivered? Is it online, in person, hybrid, asynchronous, synchronous? What are the start dates? Do they only have one start date a year? Do they have multiple start dates in a year? And, some of these questions will be really important to you, or the answers to them will be, and others won't be as significant to you. But of course, I think having those answers helps you make that decision. You also consider who's going to be in these classes with me. Is this restricted to postbacs, or are there a variety of different students in the program? Are all the students in these classes all trying to achieve the same end career goal? Or is it a mix of pre-med, pre-dental, pre-PA, et cetera, right? What's the program's attrition rates, graduation rates, and acceptance rates? They should be upfront with you about that, okay? What are their average standardized test scores? So for MCAT or DAT, or their GPAs, okay? Are they transparent about their acceptance rates? What are their success stories and what does that represent amongst those students? Okay. Wow. Other things that you should think about. What is the student support? I have this underlined and highlighted here because I think it's really critically important. It obviously shows my bias because I'm an advisor, is do you have advising? How much advising do you get? Is that individualized? Do you have it after you finish the program? Okay, so be very a good consumer in collecting that information. I don't think I could stress enough the importance of good advising and personalized advising in terms of your success. Do you have access to other things that you would typically see at a university? So counseling services, tutoring services, clubs, student activities, maybe a career office that could help you, polish up your CV or resume. So what kind of services do they have? Library services, right? Do you have opportunity for clinical experiences? They may have strong connections for that. Again, research opportunities, do they have that? Do they have prep courses built into their curriculum or discounts or affiliations with those different test prep companies, right? So it's a good thing to look at, gather that information as you're in this decision process. Faculty mentorship. One thing I hear a lot for the students I have in our postbac program is in many cases they went to a fairly large undergraduate institution and they were in big classes and didn't really have an opportunity to meet their professors or get to know them. And so, I think that's always a really important question in a postbac program. What is that class size? Am I going to be able to meet with the professor, be able to build a relationship with them? Will they provide letters of rec? And, I would say generally they do. Of course, you want that to be a good letter, which means they really know you. So thinking about that relationship that you can build with those individuals. And then I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
We will remember to unmute. Thank you, Susan. All right, folks. So additional benefits, and in fact, in my experience, something that students are particularly interested in with postbac programs are the benefits that come from admissions pipelines, so to speak. So what you're seeing on the screen is several examples of languages that you'll see on websites of postbac programs. So, they have relationships with medical schools, and you'll hear about guaranteed acceptances. This means that if you're interviewing for the postbac program and you get in, you're guaranteed an acceptance into that medical school as long as you meet certain performance metrics in the classroom and or on the MCAT. Guaranteed interview is one that I want to draw everyone's attention to. Guaranteed interview is not the same thing as a guaranteed acceptance. Sometimes students think that they're synonymous, and they're not. So a guaranteed interview means, of course, you perform at a certain level. You have an opportunity to interview for admission to that medical school. This would be something that I would definitely ask about, success rates with that program. Articulation agreements is one of many phrases. You've heard of pipeline programs, linkages, MOUs, those kinds of things. In my mind, that's all the same thing as an articulation agreement. Sometimes the guaranteed acceptance or guaranteed interview language is part of one of those agreements. Same thing with an early assurance program. Early assurance, in my mind, is more of an undergrad partnership with medical schools, but it can also show up in postbac language just because many of those are undergraduate programs. And then conditional acceptance is something that if you were to apply while you're in a postbac program, some med schools will interview you, say, in the spring semester of the academic year, and they'll offer you what's called a conditional acceptance, which is, it can be contractual or it can be just, as a written agreement that says, as long as you finish the program at a certain level and take the MCAT at a certain time and at a certain performance level, that we will have a seat ready and waiting for you. So the conditional acceptance is more of a guaranteed acceptance that just happens halfway or 2/3 of the way through your postbac year, instead of the guaranteed acceptance, which presumably is something that you would have on offer when you enter that postbac program. But that being said, this is all based on what my experience over the last 10 years has been in the postbac landscape. Every program is different, so they might have a slightly different nuanced meaning for what this language signals. So make sure that you're asking each program you're interested in very detailed questions about these particular kinds of agreements. All right. So we'll move on to the next slide. So cost of attendance, postbac programs are not inexpensive. If you've been researching them, you'll, I'm sure, agree with me. Every institution is required to publish the cost of attendance. I want to be clear. that I am not a financial aid official, and I don't think that anybody on our national committee is officially. But what I do know is, so there's tuition, which you should find on every program's website, presumably. And then there's cost of attendance, and that involves additional costs like books, cost of living, food, all those kinds of things. So cost of attendance is more of a financial aid term for like, how much support you could get from loans along the way. And then tuition is going to be a smaller fraction of what the overall cost of attendance is. But this should be readily available on websites. Every institution is going to have their own scholarship policies. And so you can contact the program. Oftentimes you will be rerouted to the institution's financial aid offices. So, be ready to communicate with those folks as well. And please understand that financial aid officials do not know any details about postbac programs other than the money part. So don't be asking them about linkages or, success rates or anything like that. The financial aid office only knows about the financial stuff. All right. Ask if schools are eligible to accept Title IV funding or FAFSA support. Some postbac programs are fifth-year undergrad. Sometimes that means that they can accept FAFSA support. Sometimes for some reason that means that they can't. The federal guidelines are always changing. So be ready for those things to change going into an academic year, and make sure that you're doing your research on that front. We're jumping around a little bit here. So grants, we could go, there we go. So grant funding is very hard to get for postbacs. I get asked about this every year. Where else can I apply for money as a postbac student? And I always have to say, if I knew there was a really sweet source of funding for postbac students, I would sing it to the mountaintops. I'm not aware of those, and so be aware of that. So most students do pursue federal loans and or private loans to finance their postbac studies. And again, reach out to those financial aid offices. All right. So if we could advance the slide. So in terms of how to apply, we've already touched on this a little bit. So Susan mentioned Postbaccalaureate. So again, this is a centralized application service for postbac programs. This is run by a company called Liaison. This is the same company that runs ACOMIS, many of the other pre-health application services. I think they actually have something to do with AMCAS nowadays as well. So in this case, through Postbaccalaureate, when you apply to your first program, it costs $141 to apply. And every program that you apply to after the first one costs you $45 on top of that. Susan mentioned you can register for Postbaccalaureate and research schools absolutely free of charge. You only pay once you want to actually apply to programs. I should also note that all of that money goes to Liaison, not the institution that you're actually applying to. And so please note here that programs may charge an additional fee. You can kind of think of this as like the secondary fee for medical schools, but it's just for a postbac program. Again, that's for the institution. Some institutions will have an additional fee on top of the postbac fee. Others won't. Okay. Then above postbac on this slide, you see school-based applications. What does that mean? It means that there's lots of schools whose postbac programs do not use postbac as Susan also mentioned. And so they're just going to have an independent application. So this is like applying for jobs. Like postbac you can apply for 30 jobs with the same material. The school-based application is you're submitting, say, 30 separate job applications, in this case, postbac applications along the way. And I don't know anything about that because I do use postbac for Temple, but every school has their own system and their own fees along the way. So I'm going to skip down to application components and come back to the blue bar. So what do you need to apply? You'll need a personal statement, transcripts. Official transcripts are needed for postbac. They will not accept unofficial transcripts. It's part of their verification process. It's much like applying to professional school. So think of postbac as a practice run for the future application to the real deal, so to speak. You need to fill out the application for activities and experiences, just like you would on your professional school application. So don't submit a resume unless a school asks for it. We all have applied for jobs where they ask for a resume and then they basically ask you to cut and paste your resume into a website. That's not what postbac asks you to do. They just want the input information. They're not asking for a resume. Okay. Test scores, letters of recommendation, and interview. This all varies by program. I do want to let people know that there is no such thing as a post-bac program entrance exam. The MCAT is a medical school entrance exam. The reason I mention this is that a lot of people see a post-bac program that has an MCAT requirement, and they'll have this plan of, oh, I'll just take the MCAT to get that score, and then I'll take it again to get the score that's going to get me into medical school. And I know that we just met. Do me a personal favor and don't do that. The only reason you should sit for the MCAT is because you think you're going to get the competitive score that's going to get you into medical school. Okay. If you already have taken it and you have that score already, great. But the MCAT is not like the SAT. You can't take it as many times as you want without penalty, super score sections, any of that stuff. The MCAT is very much the fewer times you take it, the more competitive your score is. And so the last thing any post-bac program wants is for you to take the MCAT once just to get a post-bac and take it a second or third time to get your medical school score, because that second or third score is not going to be as competitive as if you got it the very first time. All right. So if you have a clean MCAT slate, please do yourself a favor and only fill that in with a very competitive score when you know that you're ready to do that. All right. Letters of recommendation. There was a question in chat about what letters are required. If you have been out of school for a while, it still would be best to have at least one letter from a professor for most programs, but some will be okay if you've been out in the workforce for 5-10 years. They'll understand if you're getting letters from healthcare professionals instead. And whether a program interviews or not is a major component to the blue bar, so the competitive versus open enrollment. So competitive programs are going to be way more involved in their application process. It'll probably have a heavier screen followed by an interview process. Open enrollment, they might have an even heavier screen, come to think of it, because if they don't interview, they're getting all the information just from the application itself. But open enrollment usually means there's unlimited seats, so to speak, and competitive, it's limited on seats, just like a medical school. And whether they do rolling admission or timed releases for decisions is, again, program specific, and there's hundreds of programs in the country, so we couldn't possibly cover all of that information today, even if we had it. All right, so we'll move on. Another question that we get all the time is, what's the difference between an undergraduate and a graduate level post-bac program in terms of the impact that it has on my competitiveness as an applicant to medical school? So what you're looking at on the screen right now is an empty readout of what medical schools see when you apply. So you see your undergrad grades show up as freshman, sophomore, junior, senior inputs. Then there's a post-bac undergraduate line highlighted here in yellow. Then there's a cumulative undergraduate line highlighted in orange. All right. So if you do a post-bac program that offers undergraduate level coursework, whether it's prereqs like the Gen Chem, OChem, physics, biology coursework, or upper level sciences like high level bio and biochem, those kinds of things, as long as they're undergraduate level in terms of their coding, it counts as undergraduate work. It will not impact your baccalaureate GPA, but it will impact your cumulative undergraduate GPA, again, highlighted here in orange, which is the most important metric that the vast majority of professional schools use to compare applicants to other applicants. All right. Notice that we haven't highlighted the graduate line here, which is right below the orange entry. All right. If you do a master's program as your post-bac work, please understand that you will have a graduate GPA for that. Yes, it will show up on your transcript, but no, it will not be combined in any way officially with your undergraduate numbers to boost your undergraduate numbers. They will see your undergraduate GPA and they will see your graduate GPA. And because graduate programs can differ so much in terms of topic and rigor, oftentimes professional schools don't know how to compare that with somebody who doesn't have a graduate GPA, or even someone who has a graduate GPA from a completely different program and a completely different school. And so most programs default to comparing those undergraduate cumulative numbers. All right. So again, they see your undergraduate GPA, your post-bac undergraduate GPA, and then your total everything combined cumulative undergraduate GPA. The graduate GPA would not be lumped into that. All right. We'll move ahead. All right. So benefits of a post-bac program. So this is based on some research that was dug up by the committee a few years ago. And a lot of this matches all of our experiences on the committee in terms of anecdotal experiences as well. So the first one you see here, increased maturity and mental resilience. All right. So everyone's immature as freshmen and sophomores, some more so than others. A post-bac program, it's not so much like, oh, that's where I'll learn to be mature. It's where you demonstrate the maturity that you developed later on in college. And this can manifest in a number of ways, of course, in your post-bac performance metric-wise, grade-wise, but it can also show up in a committee letter or letters of recommendation from professors in the program. It can help people clearly define their goals moving forward. Everybody who don't do a post-bac program unless you know for certain that you want to be a doctor. If you don't have the experience yet, it's really much better to go out there, get a year or two of paid experience. And then if you love it, you're going to be that much more driven for a post-bac program. And if you hate it, then you didn't spend a whole lot of time, money, and energy doing a post-bac program towards a career that you never wanted. You just didn't know that yet. Okay. So post-bac programs can help build those passions as well through clinical opportunities if a program has one, or through guest speakers, those kinds of things, just part of the advising curriculum throughout programs. Okay, students perceive better preparedness. I love this one because I actually ask this on interview days sometimes. It's like, are you here to prove it just to medical schools that you're ready for this? Or are you also here to prove it to yourself? Because, people can be anywhere on that spectrum, and you are going to feel vastly more prepared for medical school after a well-designed post-bac program. And so you're going to be ready for that transition, mentally, emotionally, all those kinds of things, in addition to academically. Moving to the right on the lower level here. So despite lower GPA and MCAT scores statistically similar to peers on boards. Well, why would that be? That would be because people are finding out more and more that who you were as a freshman has little to do with who you are when you enter medical school. Even more so if you've had extra school and extra education in a post-bac program. And so a lot of times people who do academic enhancer programs, they're all in the same boat. They're not proud of their GPA. They want to prove it. And so even though they do a 4.0 and say like a 35 credit program, that doesn't bring up your undergraduate GPA from a 3.1 to like a 3.8. It'll bring it up from a 3.1 maybe to a 3.3 or a 3.4. And yet who they are now is a 4.0 student in high level sciences. They crushed the MCAT. They're ready for the boards, even though their freshman and sophomore numbers are bringing down those overall numbers. All right. So this is what schools are looking for when they do holistic review. They care way more about the numbers that you've had more recently. The longer your upward trajectory that you've established in undergrad, the more competitive you'll be for post-bac programs, but also beyond the post-bac programs once you've continued to establish or improve upon that upward trajectory. Okay. Of course, improved science GPA goes without saying. You are there to improve your GPA. You're there to prove that you are ready to focus on science because it's the foundation of a medical education. Faculty mentorship. Of course, hopefully you found this as an undergraduate. Sometimes people go to huge schools or maybe they're introverts or whatever the case may be. They weren't comfortable reaching out to faculty and being mentored or just asking questions. And sometimes a post-bac program, this is another way to increase one's maturity or apply that maturity to establish those relationships, hopefully get superior letters that help you be more competitive in the next application process. Personalized application and advice. Susan touched on this. Post-bac programs, one of the best parts about post-bac programs is that you'll be working with people who know that people can come from all kinds of timelines and backgrounds and have incredible success and achieve their dreams. And sometimes an advisor who really focuses on freshman through junior year of undergrads, they don't know the landscape as well. And so somebody who's doing like a DIY program and they're using an undergraduate advisor from their old institution, they might miss out on some things there. So the standard advice is still applicable. It's not like this brand new, like super secret kind of thing. But every year I work with a unique group of students and I learn more about the different kinds of places that people can come from and succeed. And it's really, really cool to see that. And it makes me a better advisor moving forward. Higher retention rate in medical school. So Blakey and Broussard did research on this about 15 years ago, or sorry, about 20 years ago. And this is something that you'll hear anecdotally a lot from medical school students who didn't do a post-bac program when they get asked, you know, what do you think about post-bac students or post-bac programs? Like, I really wish I would have done one, because all my classmates who did a post-bac program seem so much more prepared to start medical school smoothly than me. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but I hear a lot of stories like that. And that's what Blakey Broussard found as well. And last but not least, this was touched on a slide earlier, but please keep in mind, there is no one perfect post-bac program for all students. You do have to know what your priorities are, where your weaknesses are that you want to shore up, and also, you know what you need and what's going to put you in the best position to, become the applicant that you want to be moving forward. And so please talk to your advisors at your undergraduate institutions. If you don't have one, the NAAHP does have free advising if you don't have access to one, so you can check out that website. But maybe your advisors at your undergrad institution know alums that were successful through a post-bac program, and they can put you in touch with those folks. Of course, you can reach out to post-bac programs themselves. All right, so lots of benefits from this, and yeah, so we'll move on to the next slide. So the committee rolled with a document that was provided to us by Courtney Martinez of Northeastern University to generate a flow chart of kind of general advice for choosing a post-bac path. And this is very tip of the iceberg stuff here, folks. I think we were almost up to 300. Oh yeah, we've got 271 participants here. That means there's probably 271 different versions of questions and nuances that this slide isn't covering. But just in general, I think there were some questions in chat. It's like, what if I've never taken any of the sciences before? So if you haven't taken any of those prereqs, you'll see on the left of the screen here, you would be doing what's called a career changer post-bac program, because you're coming from a non-science background, you're switching to needing those science classes to pursue your healthcare goals. And so for a planned program, lots of advantages here, additional support, structured courses, so you're not guessing, am I going to have all the right classes at the right times, kind of a thing. People also do DIY approaches, either through programs or on their own. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. For those of you who have been a pre-med for quite some time or are coming back to it and you've taken the prereqs, many of you would be looking into the academic record enhancer options. And so the next question really is, so what's your GPA and science GPA? All right. And so what our committee recommends is, if you're between 2.8 and 3.4, you should be thinking primarily about undergraduate level programs to boost those undergraduate metrics. Also, please note that if you're below a 3.0, we really recommend that you take a year, if not 2 or 3, off from school, go get that experience again to know that this is what you want, make some money, which is nice to have in your bank account when you do a post-bac program as well. And again, then you're going to be a little bit more separated from your undergraduate metrics. You've pursued healthcare for a significant amount of time. You've reestablished that you really want to be a physician. Then you do a post-bac program. And then when you crush that, you're kind of a whole college career separated from your first college career. And you've got all this great experience. You've punctuated with a fantastic GPA in classes that matter. Of course, the MCAT is ever important. That's that last punctuation mark at the end of your post-bac career. And again, that can be done in programs that are undergraduate, and also, a less programmatic DIY kind of a method. All right. If you are already strong in the GPA department, so we tentatively set this for 3.4 and above. This is where you might want to look at special master's programs, because again, your undergraduate numbers are strong. And so having a separate GPA that's in the graduate department wouldn't be bad. There's lots of special master's programs out there that help you really do the coursework that maps directly to a lot of professional schools curricula. And also, there's nothing wrong with doing, a hard science master's program, biochem, chemistry, physics, those kinds of things. And of course, then there's MPHs, there's MBAs, those kinds of things. But those aren't really post-bac master's degrees. Those are just straight up master's degrees that one might pursue because you don't want to do it while you're in medical school or after. right? So I'd like to point out that in both the career changer and academic enhancer, we have these double asterisk statements. See community college comments below. A very common question about DIY postbacks is, can I do my DIY at community colleges? I'll just say from what I accept as a postbac program, I'll tell people I definitely accept community college courses for my program to get in. But I can't, just because I take them doesn't mean that every medical school that you have on your radar will be perfectly happy about that. So you're going to want to reach out to your regional advisors, maybe your dream schools specifically. My general advice on that personally is to default to a four-year institution if you can swing it, just because there's some question marks about community college courses in terms of how many you're taking, or if you look like you're grade shopping or ducking science courses over the summer. Something like that is not a strategically wise move to be a competitive applicant after your postbac program, all right? But that's a very person to person, program to program, professional school to professional school kind of a question, all right? So we'll move on. So these are the sources from the previous slide. Again, this is going to be recorded, so I'm not going to read all this stuff, but if you want to read those articles, those are at your disposal. And so this is our contact. I think you can talk with Susan tomorrow. She'll be at the fair. I will not be able to make it, but that's my contact information at Temple University. We're both happy to answer your questions. It looks like there's a ton of questions in chat, which is amazing. And we are not going to be able to finish that in a few minutes here, but reach out to us and we'll be happy to do our best to get you connected with information. And so here we are at Q&A.
And I was gonna say, I've done my darndest on answering questions in the chat, but I've set aside a couple questions for the two of you to answer. There's a couple sort of themes that came up. So one question theme was, can you speak to doing a master's degree versus a post-bac? Is one better than the other? Is a certificate better? Can you speak to what type of an applicant or what type of a student should be thinking about which of those different types of programs?
I think I took a stab at that already, Susan, so you have a go.
Okay, so that answer is, it really just comes down to what your background is, what your weaknesses that you're trying to shore up are, and what your strengths are. I mean, I think human nature is I want to strengthen my strengths and I want to ignore my weaknesses. But in this case, you really need to do the opposite. You need to say, what are my weaknesses? And, I think if you talk to a post-bac program, again, they are going to be honest with you. They don't want students to be unhappy there, and they're particular about who they take. I don't mean that by GPA, but like, is this a good fit? So I would encourage you to talk to a couple different ones. If you're coming to the fair tomorrow, drop into my booth. I'm happy to chat with you about your particular circumstance, because there just isn't one right answer, because they address different things. As we've said, like if you do a grade enhancement or career changer, those are undergraduate courses. They go into that, they will affect that cumulative undergraduate GPA. A master's program will not. That does not mean it's not good. It shows other things, right? So it's just really comes down to what you need to bolster in your particular record.
And then another question that came up a couple of times was, does it matter if a postbac is taken online versus in person?
So again, my advice on this is to always take classes in person. There's still a bias about this. It could be going away. I don't think it will ever go away for courses involving labs. It might go away for quote unquote just lecture courses. But again, it depends on the school. I'm learning that some schools outside of my region are a lot more flexible regarding those kinds of things. But in the Northeast, people still want in-person science classes. And so I would always steer people towards in-person. As frustrating as I know that probably is for folks.
I would agree with Bob. It's very school dependent and region dependent. For instance, the Texas schools require in-person labs. So you really need to research the schools. And I encourage students Don't ask, will you accept online labs? Ask, do you have a preference? Sometimes people accept something, you're like, yeah, but we don't really like it, and that's going to hurt you, right? So do try to get, ask the question to get the answer you don't want, and that will help you in terms of the choices that you make. Also understand this is a changing landscape. What was true last year may not be true 2 years from now. We're at 2025, the first professional classes that entered medical school and dental school and were really affected by COVID in terms of, let's say, a lot of semesters or their GPAs or online things, is really that first class is finishing up now. And so I think you're going to see schools looking at that data and saying, did we see differences in performance in these graduate programs based upon those, the spring of 2020, fall of 2020, when many things were not in person. So I think we'll probably see changes coming to that. The other thing I always tell students is online or asynchronous doesn't mean it doesn't take time. It does mean it's flexible, but that can be just enough rope to hang yourself. So remember something, there's a guideline for classes in terms of the credits it provides. So in a semester-long course, that credit that's attached to that course should equate to 3 hours of work per credit per week of the term. So a 4-credit class should be the 12 hours there per week. So the question is, if you're signing up for a class online, and this is what I see students do a lot, is I'm going to take it online and I'm going to work full time and I'm going to raise my kids and I'm going to volunteer and I'm going to do, well, there's not that many hours in a day or a week. So when you're looking at that and you're looking at a postbac, be really honest with yourself. If you're taking 12 credits, did you carve out the sufficient amount of time to be successful in those 12 credits? If the answer is no, well, I can pretty much predict how that's going to work out. So you've got to be really honest about that. Can you take that many credits? Do you need a program where you can take fewer credits? Do you need to, as Bob said, work for a couple of years and save up the money? But online or asynchronous doesn't mean there's no time involved in it.
Thank you. Another sort of series of questions have to do with folks who maybe haven't scored as well as they wanted on the MCAT. And so there's a series of questions around, can a strong MCAT offset a low GPA, or does a high GPA in a postbac program offset a low MCAT? So can you speak to how those two work together in the broader application process?
Well,
Susie?
I'll jump in, then Bob can follow. This again is going to be very school dependent. Many schools have cutoffs for an MCAT. So regardless of your GPA, if your MCAT is below the cutoff, it will not be reviewed. And some schools have cutoffs for GPAs. So again, even if the MCAT were really high, if you were below that, it would not matter. And it's very school dependent. Holistic review means everything is taken into account. Nothing, supersedes anything else, and nothing, makes that be disregarded. But MCAT and GPA are both a measure of academic readiness for medical school, right? Your GPA is obviously comprised of all the courses you took, and comparing it to someone else, well, maybe that other person took a much more rigorous load. That will be looked at, right? Obviously, the MCAT is more standardized, so that's a little bit more comparing apples to apples. But I think those are important things to keep in mind when you look at that. Also, I think it's really important, we can all lament standardized exams and their weaknesses, but the reality as going to medical school, going to dental school, you will be taking many, many of these standardized exams throughout your time in school for your certification boards. This is a skill that you have to master if you're going to be successful in the schooling. And what no one wants is that you finish a graduate program, an MD or a DDS, and you can't pass your boards and you can't practice. So you have to be able to master those skills.
Yeah, I mean, the MCAT advice can be very frustrating from medical schools, but it doesn't make it not right. It all boils down to the next time you take the MCAT should be the last time you take the MCAT. I'll tell you right now, if you've taken it once and it didn't go well, nothing's over. Okay. You know, maybe you're not getting into a top 10 medical school. Maybe you're not getting into a top 20 medical school, but also sometimes people who, especially who didn't have advisors, you know, and they really do poorly because they thought that they could just have like a practice run. I'll just see how it goes. Don't just see how it goes on a AAMC official score. See how it goes on a practice exam. There, you can get them for free in any number of places. And you know, if the second one just blows the first one out of the water, it'll look like, oh, they just didn't know that the first one meant anything. Some schools won't care. Some schools will very much care. And that's you know, part of the holistic review process that Susan's talking about. So what I would say, you know, if you're interested in MD, which I assume you are, because this is a AAMC program, I would be very nervous about applying with a 4th MCAT score. I don't know anybody personally who's gotten into an MD school on a 4th MCAT score, and I know very few who have gotten in on a 3rd MCAT score. But second is not unheard of. And it's a short list of things that are good about the MCAT. One of them is that there's an almost infinite number of practice opportunities out there. So you should not be the least bit surprised at what shows up on test day, you know, for the real deal. And the other one is that what Susan already mentioned was it prepares you for boards. And trust me, you do not want to be 2 years in the hole on med school tuition and then find out that you're bad at taking board exams. So embrace the MCAT as a valuable rite of passage, even though you'll be grumbling most of the time.
Yeah, so I would follow up with what Bob said about 3 things about the MCAT. Never, ever, ever take an official MCAT just to see how it would go. I can tell you how it's going to go, and the answer is not well if you haven't prepared for it. It is a rigorous exam. Never take the MCAT in January and say, if I don't do well, I'll take it again in April. The data that AAMC provides is very strong on this. If you take the MCAT twice in the same calendar year, your score changes on average plus or minus 1 to 2 points. It takes a long time to change that score. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's not done quickly. This is not the SAT or the ACT. Thirdly, your full-length practice tests taken in a truly simulated environment. In other words, I timed myself. I took it in, I didn't look up answers on my phone, any of the things you can't do during the exam. Those scores on those practice tests are really good indicators of how you'll do on test day. So if you are scoring in a non-competitive range on a practice test and your test is 2 weeks away, you probably need to reevaluate when you're taking the test. That practice test is probably not wrong.
And I want to ask also, there was a couple of requests on the chat. If you all could please go back. First, there was a lot of requests for the slide that had both of your emails. So if you could display that for a few seconds. And then also there was a request for the slide that had the resources, the articles. So I want to be sure and give time for both of those. But I know we
One
are
too far.
getting close on our time, coming close to an end here. So I want to be sure that we speak to those. And while those are being displayed, another sort of series of questions that came in, if you can elaborate just a little bit, there was questions around how, in the realm of how to pick a postbac, is a certificate better than a master's? Is a program that is connected better to a medical school better than one that is not connected to a medical school? So I wanted to just, if you all could speak to some of those types of considerations, do those things, are they urgent?
Susan?
Well, so again, it goes to what you need, right? Like is a certificate important? Is anyone going to ask ever to see it? Probably not. It has certain implications in terms of things like financial aid and things like that. It also might mean you have to take courses that maybe you're not interested in taking to get the certificate. Is a master's better? Again, what do you need? Do you have the background to even get into a master's, right? And a master's will not improve your undergraduate GPA. So, what do you need to improve your record and make you competitive for the graduate programs? And that answer is really different from individual to individual, right? So that's a factor of cost, flexibility, financial aid. What is my background? What do I need to fix? So again, there's not a better in that. It's what's best for you, particularly based upon your particular record and the real life, I hate to use the word limitations, but the parameters around how you're going to be able to make a decision.
Okay.
Yeah,
For you answer, Bob. Susan, can you go back to the slide that has your emails? There was another request for that. Sorry, Bob.
no, that's okay. So the programs that I run are undergraduate level, and we started off as non-certificate. And after a few years, we introduced a certificate. And we saw no increase or decrease in success rates. And then we found out the certificate, getting to Susan's comment about financial aid, for whatever reason, the way the federal guidelines were set up at the time, the certificate was preventing our students from being eligible for FAFSA support. So we sunset the certificate immediately, because it's not the certification, it's the transcript that matters. It's the rigor of the program, and it's, are you getting what you need for your MCAT prep if you don't already have it banked? I will say that I actually do know that they check for certificates. If you tell schools that it's a certificate program and it's not a certificate program, that could cost you an acceptance, because it's like, well, you told us it's a certificate program and the school's saying that it's not. So make darn sure of what you're telling medical schools about your coursework, because they will look into that at least as a touchstone. I don't think it's like a competitive advantage. But with or without the certificate, what always matters is the performance and the transcript.
And one question that came in while these last couple were being answered was, what would doing well in a master's program demonstrate? And I think the reference is compared to doing well in a certificate or an undergrad postbac program. What would the benefit be there?
That's a tricky one.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
So again, so when we covered the slide about like undergrad postbac versus grad postbac and the GPAs, like that's really that's what they're seeing or not seeing or considering and not considering. In terms of what you're actually proving in, like, say, high level undergrad versus graduate school, it could be the exact same things. It's really just a question of what did the schools value. I think that if your dream school has a master's program and you get into it and they have a strong pipeline with success rates that are high, no reason not to do it. But what I would be nervous about if that pipeline didn't work out and you have a graduate GPA, how that would look at other schools, just from a strategic point of view. Because I'd hate to hear that somebody put a year or two into a graduate program, it didn't work out for that medical school, and now other medical schools want them to boost their undergraduate metrics to be competitive. But we don't have crystal balls, so that we don't know, oh, you just do this. It's going to be a juggling act, or a balancing act, so to speak.
I would agree. Again, it goes back to the medical school. What do they put value on? They might, if they have their own master's, they might put a lot of value on that. They know the rigor of it, so that's important to them. But another school doesn't put the value on it. In terms of other types of masters in public health, as an example, or an MBA, do those degrees if they're interesting and exciting to you and you're passionate about it. Don't do that to think, oh, it's going to be super helpful for my application. Do it because you care about it, because you think it'll help you as a future physician. But otherwise, that isn't going to be a big factor in your medical school admissions or your dental school admissions.
I want to be mindful of the time. We have officially, I think, gone 1 minute too long. But thank you to everybody. Thank you to our presenters. There have been a lot of great questions, a lot of great information shared, but I do believe we need to wrap it up here. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming, folks. Hope this was helpful.
Final reminder, it is going to be recorded, or it is recorded, and it should be on AMC's website, they said, within 24 hours.